Siemens networks, we had lots and lots of opportunity to experiment, and then we can go back and convince the management. But in the service industry, it's totally opposite, right? So most of the time it comes from your client, right? And then most of the times we just do Scrum, right? So what happens, the delivery manager, they will just, okay, appoint some Scrum masters, okay, start do daily Scrum, that's it, right? So you do a planning meeting, you do daily Scrum, a review and a retro, you capture those minutes of meeting, okay, we are doing Scrum, right? So most of the times this is what it happens, and many times we forgot those engineering practices, right? See, when I have coached many teams in the services industry, where it's like very hard to see that they follow practices like TDD or even CI, right? So they just have Jenkins or Bamboo, but then if you see those continuous integration hierarchy and what are the builds that they have on a daily basis, it's like really in a bad shape, right? So, sorry?
Someone need to approve the build.
Yeah, so still those engineering practices are not inbuilt into the team, right? So most of the delivery managers, they just have those delivery pressures, the SLAs and stuff like that. They they don't get much time to focus on those technical depth, right? Especially those engineering practices, because this is not going to like add immediate gain, right? So this will add benefits only in the long run, right? When the product gets into the maintenance phase, these engineering practices. But in the services industry, we never know whether the contract will be renewed or not, right? So we sign a 2-year deal, and then we don't know whether it will be renewed or not, right? So nobody bothers about those engineering practices and the code quality stuff, right? So they take a back seat, right? So billing, so it's majorly T&M, right? So as long as the contract goes, so we get our billing part, right? So and then we take our profits out, right? So most of the times we forget to add value to the client, right? We just focus on our money, how many pressures we can add into the team, what is our profitability, utilization and stuff like that, right? So we get into those numbers, right? So we forget to add value to our clients. How many of you here like you report SLAs, metrics, data? Yeah, I think most of you, right? So how many of you provide a honest figure? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, fine. That's great. Okay, I'm saying to the client. To the, okay, fine, great. So what happens if a metric is bad? Like for example, the last one didn't go well, right? It's failed. Okay. So you don't get any resistance from your management?
They get frustrated.
Okay.
But then that's okay. I make sure their frustration is coming there also, not
Okay, good. So then that's a good situation to be in, right? But in many cases, what happens is that the delivery management, so what they feel is, okay, we try to cover the bad news to the client as much as possible, right? So we try to look good in front of the client, right? Because the fear of losing the contract, right? When there are multiple like vendors available for the client, and today in a highly competitive industry like us, right? If we do a bad job for 3-4 sprints, then who knows that the deal may get cancelled and it may go to our competitor, right? So many times the delivery management and the sales team, they are a lot worried about showcasing the bad news to them, right? So, but it all depends on the relationship between the vendors and the client, right? So even though we say that, okay, we need to have a good relationship with the client and we need to collaborate with them, but many times it's really difficult, right? Only some of our people will be at on-site working closely with our clients, and for the rest of the offshore team, it's very difficult to maintain the relationship with them, right? So we talk through some voice calls or some Skype calls, right? So it's very difficult. It all boils down to the relationship. If you have a good relationship and a rapport, then I think it's a good thing to share everything, right? So don't try to cook it up. But this is the current reality I have seen in many of the accounts, right? Okay, and the worst part I have seen is the penalties, right? Like for example, if your average velocity is 50 story points per sprint, and if it goes down in a sprint or a release, right, then you need to pay so-and-so penalty, right? These are actually real numbers actually in the contract, and then they even talk about productivity in terms of story points per developer per day and things like that, right? So So this is the reality, right? So people who have written those contracts in the initial time, right? So without knowing much about how we work in an agile way, so these contracts were already written and signed, and then now the agile teams can't do much about it, right? And then this is again, so this causes that fear of failure, right? So for example, if you miss the velocity for 2 or 3 sprints continuously, then we need to pay some penalty, right? And then obviously it leads to the previous effect, right? Okay, cook up the data, try to show some like good figures, right? So that is what happens. So that's why we need to be very careful when the contracts get signed during the initial time, right? So that's why we try and teach the pre-sales team as much as possible. So we do a lot of training programs for them and how Agile works or how Scrum works, right? But still, this issue is there in most of the organizations, right? So we need to change that. And when we deal with multiple vendors, right? So this is the client, right? Who is the one who's really worried about the particular piece of software, right? So why, like they are doing a particular project or a program is as part of their business strategy. So they need to invest money in this piece of product or the software so that it can add some benefits to their business, right? Like for example, if a large telecom giant is creating a online payment portal or a customer portal, that is because to improve their customer satisfaction of paying the bills online and not going to the physical stores, right? So there is a purpose behind each and every software that you're working on, right? So this guy, the poor client, is really committed to that particular piece of software, right? And then what we expect from all the vendors is the same commitment, right? So we also work like an extended team and add value to the client's activities, right? But most of the times what happens is we just be a chicken, right? So we just involve ourselves, but then we don't commit ourselves to the client's agenda, right? And there can be multiple reasons, right? Again, it could be the relationship, or we don't have time to understand the client's agenda or the big picture. There could be multiple reasons like that, but most of the times we end up being just chickens. And how about the collaboration between one vendor and the other vendor? Chickens, right? So it's like, for example, if one piece of the program is done by vendor A and another piece by vendor B, right? Sometimes we need handovers because once we give the bill to the other vendor, they may need to start some performance testing or the security testing, right? And then it's just a formal handover, right? We don't really collaborate with the other vendor because they are our competitors, right? They are our direct competitors, right? So we don't try to share the knowledge about the product very openly, right? So because we feel that, okay, they are our competitors, if we share too much, then they may take the project away from them, right? So now there is like so much of sarcasm in the industry, right? So we try to like protect our own interest and stuff like that, right? So again, the multi-vendor contracts, there's a lot of issues, right? So normally if the client wants to get that program out in the market very quickly, then the overall lead time has to be down, right? But due to all these issues, then the lead time also gets increases for the client, right? So what happens? So anybody can correlate these situations in your current program or the team? So what are the scenarios? Anybody wants to share your thoughts, or anybody want to disagree with me?
Okay, the velocity, if you miss that, 5% penalty.
5% penalty.
Yeah, if you achieve it, no rewards.
No rewards, sir? Okay. So then you can be careful while committing, right? You can always commit less. Oh, it's already set in the contract, the velocity.
Yeah, this is the velocity of the sprint.
Okay, so how come they can derive? Because if it is a new team which is working together, and then we have not run a sprint. Okay, and we have not run a sprint, but they already decided the velocity. And then we all know the solution, right? So we all know how to handle this situation. How we handle this? Cook up, right? Instead of 5 points, say 8 points. Simple, right? So we all know, right? So we also know how to deal with this situation, right? So the loop goes on, right? So that's unfortunate. So what happens in this scenario, right? So what an agile coach can do, right? Unfortunately, I am one of those agile coaches, right? So handling, huh? Yeah, this is like a forum to, okay. I think we are on the same page. Good. Actually, I also face the same response actually. So I think you and me we are in the same boat, right? So what happens most of the times, the moment we go and say agile, right? So they say, okay, no. Like we have a lot of delivery pressures, we have releases, we have production issues to focus on, right? When we go and talk about, okay, the improvement items, what we need to do improve and all the stuff, okay, it all takes the back seat, right? So they give the first importance to the delivery. So they see agile as something, an additional thing which is being pushed on them, right? Because it is already mandated by the client in the contract that you need to do Scrum. So everybody feels that it's a mandate, it's something which is pushed on them, right? So they don't feel that it's a way of doing things. So most of the times we end up being hitless. I think as the other speakers were talking during their elevator sessions, right? So they are saying that, okay, sometimes the coach gets into the command mode, right? The command and control kind of stuff, because he or she has to mandate those agile practices within the team. There is no other way for the coach, right? So they get into that command and control mode, and then they just like work like a Hitler, right? So for them, it's like they're expected to make sure that, and even in some cases there will be agile SLAs, right? Specifically out of all the SLAs, there will be like 3 or 4 metrics that will be called as an agile SLAs, and the agile coach is accountable for that, right? So they all get into that, the traditional stuff, right? And then the actual coaching is lost, right? So then what happens to the Scrum Masters? Then this is what happens, right? So if an agile coach just wants to get the report and then prove those SLAs are working fine, just keep the show running up, then he just takes the updates from the Scrum Masters and then he just sends it to the management, right? So even the Scrum Masters are just seen as the people who just attend those SOS meetings, who provide those status reports to the management and stuff like that. So even they don't get that environment to play that servant leadership role for their Scrum teams, right? So that's a start stage, right? And of course, we are end up doing this, right? So we talk a lot about sustainable pace in the Agile Manifesto, but then, like for example, if we have that 5% penalty if we miss that velocity of the sprint, then what we do? We work overtime, we work weekends, right? I have seen this happening in Scrum teams frequently, right? Most of the weekends they work just to catch up on their sprint commitments, right? So they don't have the courage to go back and tell the client, look, we committed for so many user stories in this sprint, but these are the impediments which happened, or we estimated low, so we need to remove something from the sprint backlog. Nobody wants to do that, right? And especially the people playing the, so normally in the service industry, the client will be playing the product owner role, right? So from our side, there will be a proxy product owner role, right, PPO. So they're not willing to take that bad message to the client, right? So what they will do, somehow get things done, right? So that's the mentality, right? And
management, and how do they capture it? Like how do they showcase? Like see, once I do a mistake, how do, like if I have 5 sprints, probably I should somehow look for correcting it. So how do we not work on those areas? As a Scrum Master, I would prefer to do that. Every time like I get into retrospective, I do not want to see like same thing coming up every sprint. Yeah. So there should be a way we could maybe add more people, or like bring it up with the management meetings, ensure like we have something worked up on these kind of situations. So we generally don't see this overtime coming frequently in our projects, but whenever we see it, obviously comes up as part of retrospective. One or the other person in the team would surely raise this as a concern.
Okay, so I think it's good if the retrospectives are effective, then I think we can solve this problem as part of the retrospective action item, right? But what happens if the retrospection is also became like people are bored with the retrospectives, so they don't see any improvements happening out of retrospection, and the team has lost faith in retrospectives. So this happens over time. I'm talking about teams, projects are working for more than 3 years.
This happens when you don't take feedback anymore.
Correct. So yeah, on a positive side, if the retros work well, the problem should be addressed there. But on the negative side, if the retros have become just like another meeting, and there are team, if the team sees no improvements out of retrospection, then they like lose hope in that retrospection. Actually, when I took over as a coach for a new project, and when I attended their retrospection meetings, I hardly see anybody talking or writing their notes in a post-it notes. I was just wondering, right? Only very few discussions, they are just pouring out their emotions, right? And then they just go back. So there was no real improvements that was happening out of a retro, right? So I was trying to change them, but like believe me, to change the behavior of a legacy team, right? That was working for 3 years or 4 years, it's very hard. If it is a new team who have just started working together, things are very easy to set it up. But changing the legacy team, it's hard. I'm actually finding it hard, and I'm looking for solutions to do that. So that's what we will discuss in the next. Okay, doing Agile continuously. Okay, great.
Too many teams within the team, I would say, and many challenges.
Fine.
People
Okay.
are- yeah.
I think once we come to that the solutions section, I think we can all discuss about how we can solve. I think so that will be more helpful for us, right? So we all know the problems, right? So and then yeah, again some of the MAD metrics, right? Your velocity should keep increase sprint after sprint, right? So that is I have seen in many projects they try to track the individual productivity and individual utilization. All those things gets into picture, right? So we get into all these MAD metrics, right? Yeah, and then poor engineering practices, right? So many times we just focus on SLAs and deadlines, we miss on the code quality part, right? So we keep accumulating a lot of technical debt, and especially with teams who have worked more than 3-4 years, and when I just go there as a coach and then I see a huge technical debt, and no matter how much ever you try to reduce the debt, it's like they just keep adding the debt. At least I ask them to stop adding the debt, but even that's not happening actually. Even the debt still accumulates, right? And then finally what they do, if the project fails, then they have something to blame, right? Then they'll say, okay, this is all because of Agile and Scrum, right? So this was an Agile project, then we didn't have much control on the team, so they are committing on their own and stuff like that, so everybody will just blame Scrum and then go away, right? Fine, so this also happens between the client and stuff, right? So finally so this is the last slide in section 2, right? So let's not talk more about the problems, right? We'll talk about the solutions from the next slide onwards, right? It all boils down to transparency, right? So forget about transparency with the client, right? But how transparent are we within our Agile teams?